Okay, well, sitting in front of you this time, we have a steel. It has a bone handle, and of course the rest would be steel. I'm not sure the maker manufacturer. What I do know is that this was a gift to me from my grandfather. Well, sort of, not exactly a gift. He didn't wrap it up in a box and give it to me with wrapping paper. He let me take it when I was going off to college. He let me raid his spare stuff. I got to go through his attic and take things that he wasn't especially using in his kitchen. Now, he used to use this steel in his home, but he was a butcher, and then he retired from being a butcher, and so he had much longer butcher's steels that he took into his house after the butcher store closed. And so he had his work steel that he used all the time, and this was sort of his fancy at-home steel, and he was very practical about things, and so he didn't think that he needed two good steels and that I should take the smaller one. So I took this steel with me when I went to college, and have had it ever since. This knife is nothing other than to show, whoops, I guess I'm hitting stuff on the keyboard, to show, let's see if we can get the sound of, I'm not sure, it's kind of difficult to sharpen the knife close enough to my face for the sound to go into the microphone without well, I guess it is probably pretty dangerous, but let me pull the mic away and try it one more time. I hope that was sufficient to get the sounds in, and I'll try it after. I'll check it out afterwards to be sure. This is a knife that I picked up in Korea. It's seen a lot of use. I like it. It's not quite a cleaver. It's fairly sharp, but if you look at the edge, you can see, yeah, it's pretty dinged up from chopping through bones and stuff. It's not really the best steel there is. It really needs to be reground. I've chopped through things that I really shouldn't have chopped through with it, but it was like a $9 knife, and so as far as good knives or cheap knives go, this would be pretty much a cheap knife. But it's seen a lot of work. I've used it for years and years, and it's fairly comfortable in the hand, and I use it for lots of stuff. It's usually what I chop garlic, and actually, excuse me, that's wrong. That's not the one that I chop garlic with. I have an uru that I use to chop garlic with. But I'm not here to talk about knives, although I collect them and have quite a few knives. I decided today that I was going to talk about my grandfather who gave me this steel. He's my Grandpa Barker. He was my playmate when I was a little kid. My mom had to work sometimes, and so my grandparents would watch me. This was before my mom married my dad. I have a biological father out there that I've never met and actually never cared to meet. He and my mother divorced, and they only got married because she was pregnant with me. They got divorced because he was a real jerk, and he never really wanted to have anything to do with me anyway. He tried to get some money from my biological dad in order, from my real dad, to get him to agree to the adoption. My dad, who adopted me, refused to pay, and my parents took my biological father to court, and he, of course, when he got in front of the judge, was perfectly willing to sign the adoption papers without much of a fight at that point. Anyway, that's Wow, that's really off topic. I'm here to talk about my grandfather. So my mother was not married to my father until I was about 4.5 years old, and yes, that played a part in my decision. I don't remember. I only vaguely remember a time before my mother married my father, and most of the time that I remember before my mother married my father was my time at my grandfather's house. My Grandpa Barker was my mom's dad, and he was also my playmate when I was a kid. I would have to stay over at my grandparents' house, and my grandma, although she loved me, didn't especially like to play with me. She was always praying or watching her soap opera, and it was pretty much her rosary took her 3 hours, so she'd sit on her lazy boy and pray for 3 hours, and then it would be time for her shows, and she'd start watching her shows all afternoon. So when I was over there, it was pretty much me and Grandpa, which was fine with me because Grandpa had no problem hanging out with me, playing with me, spending time with me. We'd do all kinds of stuff. We wouldn't usually play games. Grandpa didn't like to play Tiddlywinks or any of the games that I had. I had to play those on my own. But he would goof around in the kitchen with me and draw pictures with me and just talk to me. One of the things that I really loved about my grandpa was that he always just talked to me. He never... I never remember him ever talking to me like I was a kid. He didn't try to use simpler language with me. He didn't, I found out later, he didn't really avoid any subjects with me. Things that he wanted to talk about, he'd talk to me about. Whether or not he believed I could understand him, he just figured if it was interesting, he would talk about it with me. And so we talked about all kinds of stuff. We talked about science and history and outer space and his views on various things. And he started talking to me that way from a very young age, 3, 4, 5 years old. And this continued throughout our lives. When I got older, I always wanted to spend the night at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And to spend the night at Grandma and Grandpa's house, the cool thing was that I was able to drink coffee with my grandpa. The not so cool thing was I had to go to bed at 6 or 7 p.m. because my grandparents went to bed usually about 6 p.m. Now my grandfather woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so he was awake from 4 a.m. until 6 p.m., which, if you move it to 8 a.m. until 10 p.m., that wouldn't seem that unusual to a lot of people. Eventually my grandpa started staying up until 8 or 9 o'clock, but he was always getting up 4, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So when I would spend the night at Grandma and Grandpa's, I would sleep on the couch, and Grandpa would come into the kitchen as quietly as he could at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would always try to wake up as soon as I heard him wake up, but I very seldom was able to. He was very stealthy. However, his coffee pot would make a final kind of a gurgling sound when it was finishing up the perking, which was usually loud enough to wake me up. So at the end of the perking for his first pot of coffee, I would wake up. This would usually be maybe 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it didn't wake me up, but on a good morning it did. So come 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I would go padding into the kitchen, my hair all up all over the place, my eyes all bleary, and I'd quietly go to the bathroom, of course, because first thing in the morning you got to go to the bathroom. But even before I brushed my teeth and anything else, I would come back and sit down with Grandpa, and we would sit and look out the window, and we wouldn't talk, we wouldn't say much of anything, but we'd just sit there for a few hours looking out the window, and I really, really loved this time. Plus I got to drink coffee milk. Now, it looks like my time is running out, so we'll do part 2 starting with coffee milk at 5 years old.